Well, hello again. This is the second of a little series on slavery for American history. And in this particular lecture, we're going to look at how slavery comes to America. All right. So in the previous video, we're talking about the beginnings of slavery and how slavery eventually, the concept of economic slavery gets into Africa through the Gold Coast. Now, let's move on forward. Well, by the time we get into the 1400s, specifically 1492, we've got, so we have the Age of Exploration. Now, the Age of Exploration is a pretty important time for a couple of reasons. First, we have new types of technology that allows for navigation. Now, part of the reason for the new navigation technology is it happens in Spain and Portugal, and it is part of the education, then the sophistication of education in Spain and Portugal prior to 1492 while it was under Islamic rule. If you remember from the last lecture, Islam went all the way up over North Africa, and they also go into Spain. And they end up in Spain around the 700s, and from about between 700 and 752 was the last battle, kept them from the battle between the Europeans and the Islamic conquest. And it keeps everybody here in Spain and Portugal still very much influenced by the Roman Empire, while the rest of Europe really is very diminished. But here we still have a lot of remnants of the Roman Empire under Islam, and so we see for 500 years in Spain and Portugal what we call the Golden Age of Spain. A lot of people will call it that, historians, meaning that's what I mean when I say people, call it that because it was a time of great peace in the Andalusian Peninsula, and where we see where Jews, Christians, and Muslims live together quite well. Spain is becomes the home in this time of the greatest philosopher in Judaism called Maimonides. Maimonides was a physician, and he was a physician to the greatest general in Islamic history, Saladin. And again, people would be able to, they intermingled, they intermarried. It was a great time of peace. And when you have times of peace, you have a rise in literature and mathematics and education, and in the arts. You see a very large increase in the arts. It was also very much part of a larger trade network, and specifically the western parts of Spain, very much part of the Celtic. It's very Celtic, had a large a trade network with the Celts. And if you listen to music, Spanish music, it's really fascinating and really beautiful, beautiful music, because some of the music, depending on where you are, is influenced by Islam, it's influenced by the Celts, and it has its own very unique styles. It's really, really beautiful. But Spain and Portugal were very much still, they had 500 or 600 years that were very much influenced by Islam and the complexity of their society, as well as a desire for education. And with peace, you had a growth in all these areas that really educated the populace greatly, substantially. But by 1492, we have the Reconquista, and that is the reconquering of Spain and Portugal to Catholicism, to Christianity. And in the process of the Reconquista, the king and queen, Isabella and King Ferdinand, they need soldiers. So these soldiers who were fighting for the king and queen, very young men, and people didn't live as long as they do now, but they were by and large young men, and they were given the okay to do whatever they needed to do in order to the ends justify the means. So they could rape, rob, and pillage, and do whatever they wanted, and for the end, which means or for the ends, which was the reconquering of that land for the king and queen, the Catholic king and queen of Spain. And it's very important to understand religion is coming into play here. It is for Catholicism. Now, we're before Protestantism. This is way before Protestant Reformation. So in 1492, when the Reconquista ended and all Spain and Portugal were united again, they were the first nation states, they had all these guys, number one, who were pretty much used to doing whatever they wanted to do. And now they had to control and they had to rule over this new kingdom. So what are we going to do with these guys? The second thing that was just as equally as important is trade. So they, because they were part of the Islamic Empire, they had access to trade that most of Europe never had access to. And they want to continue that trade. They wanted to continue being part of that trade, all those trade routes. But here's the sticky wicket. They don't want to pay for all the middlemen. All the middlemen from the Middle East and from the Orient all the way to Spain under Islamic Empire, they were all Muslim or Jewish or some Christian. But now they wanted all the money for themselves. They didn't want to have any of these middlemen in the way. And so they said to themselves, let's find a way directly to the source of these supplies, these resources, these spices and cottons and all kind of just everything that they wanted. Let's go directly to the resource. So they created a fleet of ships called a caravel, and what they did initially was they skirted down. They didn't go out into the open ocean. Most of these ships weren't really. Columbus did it, but most of the caravels were really they weren't really designed initially for open ocean. And what they would do in the beginnings of exploration is they would come down along the edge of Africa and in the Mediterranean, but along the edge of Africa. And then some folks got all the way around into India, and there's a lot there that we can't even go into. But they were in for a rude awakening, because they had thought that because they were Christian and they were so advanced technologically with armaments and strategy for winning wars, that therefore they had to be so much more superior than everybody else in the world. And they learned very quickly that was not the case. So what they learned was that they needed money. They needed real money in order to trade directly with the people in the East. How are they going to get money? Well, one of the ways that they're looking at getting money is, well, they go down to the Gold Coast, they begin to trade with the people on the Gold Coast, and they also see these islands out here. And this is a real important little thing here. There are these islands that are off of the coast of Africa. And what's on these islands? Well, natural sugarcane is growing there. And sugarcane is very labor intensive, but sugarcane is an ingredient in rum. You need sugar to make rum. Rum is important for sailing. Everybody has grog, and then you have rum rations on 1 day a week. So rum becomes very, very important, a very important product for exploration. It keeps the men on the ship. These guys are on a ship. They're taking their lives into their hands. They think they're doing it for the greater good. They think they're doing it so that something they're doing for greater good. I should take some of that back, because the incentive that they have to do this, to be out on the ocean, whether it's just skirting the continent or out here, is that they are they're going to get land, they're going to become money, they're going to hit the jackpot. It's all about the money. Really, at the end of the day, show me the money. That's what this is about. So they see sugarcane and they see dollar signs, well, what we would call that, but they see money sign, gold signs here, because if they're able to have labor to service these sugarcane fields and make it into a usable good to create rum, then now they have another product that they can sell or keep to encourage more men to be out on the boats. Sugarcane here is not about all cakes and cupcakes and things like that. I mean, some sweets are used, but most of the time in this time period, honey is used to sweeten things. Anyway, so sugarcane becomes this thing. Now, who's going to be the labor force for this? Well, the Africans. So the Africans are sold here on the Gold Coast. They come here. They live. They thrive. They do very well because this is a type of climate and environment that's very similar to their home. So they've got these sugarcane fields and they become sugarcane plantations over time that become very, very lucrative. Now, as time goes by and there's more exploration, they need more places, they want to conquer more lands, and then they want to create more plantations for sugarcane. And sugarcane is the primary product that drives the need for slaves. So it comes down, and here we are in the Caribbean islands. First happens in the Caribbean islands. Once again, it's about environment. If you take people out of their natural environment, they're going to die quicker from disease, because disease is usually the number one killer for all groups of people who are leaving home. Immigration and conquering disease is really the number one thing that kills the majority of people. So you want to make sure that if you're going to create a plantation or you're going to create a new source to grow sugarcane, these guys are trying to do it in a way that their slaves, these guys that they're buying from Africa, are going to live and be able to produce the product, work the fields. That works. By and large, that works. And many times, part of the Middle Passage is that slaves coming from Africa go to the Caribbean first for the longest time. And not only that, because the Caribbean is the earliest part in the the Western Hemisphere that has slavery, economic-based slavery, many times, and definitely in your textbook, it goes into the Amistad, where you have free Africans who are brought down here, and they change ships to a Spanish ship, and they're given all Spanish names to make it appear as though they're not free men, which was against the law, but rather they were already slaves that they're transporting, because in the Caribbean that had been established for such a long time. Now, from the Caribbean, though, this experience of having slaves for economic labor purposes is really very lucrative. And eventually, what ends up happening is that it pulls these folks, the Spaniards and the Portuguese are driving this. And they come down to Mesoamerica and South America. Mesoamerica and South, so in the Aztecs and the Incas. So they go down there because, once again, gold is, it's economically driven. And in a new kingdom of Spain and Portugal, they need to rule. They need money in order to rule. That's one of the ways you maintain strength in your sovereignty. So they need gold. They need also gold in order to go and buy the goods they want. So they're looking for gold. Now they're looking for gold, and they go into Aztecs and they go into Incas, and what do they find? Gold and silver. Oh my gosh, by the tons. And they bring their slaves in, and once the natives are so they utilize the local population first, and then once they're basically killing them off, then they bring in slaves from the Caribbean, because once again these slaves here have been in Western Hemisphere for a while, and so transporting them to a similar environment is going to be more advantageous for them, because then they're going to not die. They are accustomed to that similar type of environment, and so you get them working. Now, slavery down in Mesoamerica and South America this is economics for gold and silver. Well, once they find the mother lode of gold and silver and they bring it back to Spain and Portugal are so wealthy, so freaking wealthy, that it messes up the whole economic markets in Europe. But it also says to England and to France and to the Dutch, hey, I want to get on this train. We have got to be able to make some money here. And that's where mercantilism comes in, which we talked about at the beginning of the semester. But really, for this particular lecture right here, it's all about every other new nation state, wanting that economic strength to help their sovereignty. And they need that gold. They need gold as well. So they also begin looking for gold. Now, when they start looking for gold, the British, specifically for our purposes, the British eventually, that's the reason why they create Jamestown. Now, they don't have any slaves with them. They just think, why bring anybody else in? They're not really thinking about the slave market yet. All they're thinking about is New World equals gold. And so that's why the Joint Stock Company gets together. It's a for-profit company. They go, and the Virginia Company, and then they go to Jamestown, what becomes Jamestown. And what do they find? They don't really find gold, do they? But they find tobacco. Okay, so here's the beginning of real slavery in this country. And what happens is, over here in Jamestown, the English learn how to grow tobacco. Tobacco is the crop. It's not sugarcane. Tobacco is the crop. And it's really specific to Maryland and Northern Virginia, also known as the Chesapeake. Now, as the Spaniards did in Spain and Mesoamerica, they utilized the indigenous population to help them find and to labor in the mines for gold and silver. Well, there are no mines here, there's land. Who teaches them about tobacco and how to plant tobacco and grow tobacco but the Native Americans who live around them? So the Native Americans start helping the British, the English over here, who are living here in the Virginia Company, start showing them how to plant and grow tobacco. The Native Americans, the local Native Americans. So the local Native Americans are showing them, and the English begin to want more land in order to grow more tobacco, and the Native Americans are helping them. And also, because of things that are happening in England, prisoners and criminals, or prisoners of war and criminals, are also being shipped to the colonies, and they become indentured servants, and they are laboring in these fields as well, and they become the next largest labor force for the people in the Chesapeake for tobacco, because the Native Americans say, hey dudes, you're really beginning to encroach on our land. You're getting really greedy, and we're not going to help you anymore. And they back away. The Native American population stops helping the English. So now we have indentured servants coming over from England, and they want more and more and more indentured servants. But the work is backbreaking. The work is difficult. And so what ends up happening? Well, those indentured servants start running away. Now they're white. They end up running away. This is the wilderness. So they're just leaving. Some of them, who knows, some of them probably die. Don't know how to, it all depends on their backgrounds, whether they survive or not. But they sure do run away. There's nothing to say you are an indentured servant. So now what are they going to do? Now what are they going to do? Well, what they do is they contact the Dutch, who have the Dutch East India Trading Company, and the Dutch bring over the first group of Africans to work in labor in the fields, 1619. 1619. Now, the first group of Africans that come over, very important thing here, they are not slaves. They are not slaves. The first Africans in 1619, and the next group, 1622, they are not slaves. They are indentured servants. Which, what does that tell your critical thinking mind? It tells you that it's learned. It was not assumed. It was not it wasn't a preconceived notion, or like, of course anybody who's black is a slave that comes over here. That's not the case. They came against their will, but they were indentured servants. Indentured servants. And we see that between 1630 to 1675 to 1690, you see the process by which free black people in this country become slaves, become identified with slaves. The people who first come in 1619 and 1622, they have all the rights and privileges of anybody else. They can carry guns, they can go to court, they can enter into contracts, they can own land, they're part of the headright system. All this is true. But by the time their grandchildren are born, they have lost those rights. They've lost all those rights. And there's all legal documentation to support what I am saying. Anthony and Mary Johnson is a great example. It's in your textbooks. That not only were they part of the headright system, but they too owned slaves, and they also owned indentured servants. So, hey, they were living the dream like everybody else, because it wasn't this concept of slavery for life and all brutality. Super important concept, how it is learned behavior. So in 1619 and 1622, the first group of Africans come over and they begin working in the fields as indentured servants. Now, why does it change from indentured servants over to slaves for life? Part of it is Bacon's Rebellion, where you can't be white and be an indentured servant and be treated brutally. If you're a British citizen, you have rights, and you have the ability over time. The indentured servitude contract becomes far more complex. Then you have, but then the really big deal is that this economic labor force is tied with color of their skin, because they can't get up and run away. I mean, they can, but according to the way the laws become written, slavery gets directly connected to the color of a person's skin, directly connected. Because the white indentured servants would just run away and blend in with the rest of the people. Now you have a means by which to keep people as their labor force. And the more land that was taken over by the English, as the Chesapeake grew and grew and grew, then the more labor source they needed, and that labor source came directly from the slave trade. And in order then to maintain this slave trade, to secure this labor force from ever becoming anything other than a labor force, we see the beginnings of the degradation of the black population in the process of dehumanizing them in order to create laws that make them stay in servitude. Because you can't force somebody who you consider your equal to be treated poorly, to be treated horribly. You can't do that if you think you're a sane human being. You have to rationalize why you're allowing one group of people to be treated terribly and to allow things like the Middle Passage to even be in existence. You cannot think of people who are black as being anything other than subhuman. That's how you do it. That's how people throughout all of history have tried to diminish other people. World War II, as I mentioned in a previous video last week, Hitler did it. You make caricatures of the people that look not like human beings. So it's extremely important to understand this is a process. And I urge you all to read about Mary Johnson in a book by Carol Birkin. She is called Colonial Women. And if you want that, she tells stories about different women in the colonial period. And I have that article, that chapter on Mary Johnson. I'll be happy to share with you. And in there, you can see the laws and how they changed during her generation, during her lifetime, that diminish and take away the rights of people who are black. And then you see the very first slave codes coming around in Virginia in 1705. And those slave codes are now policy. It's law that's put into place that slavery is, number one, based on race. Number two, if a mother is a slave, then the child is a slave. And number three, there has to be a process of manumission, of freeing the slaves. It's a legal process. Just like it was a legal process in Rome, it's a legal process. But unlike in Rome, every state or every colony had a different set of rules that would lead to manumission. In the state of North Carolina, you had to save your master's life in a crisis or something like that to be considered to be manumission, and also that master, that owner of you, had to agree, oh my gosh, without this person, I would not have lived, and I want them freed. And then in order for them to still stay in the state with you, you had to put up a certain amount of real money in order to, and say, I know this person is never going to harm another individual, a white person. So it's really very difficult. Different states were different on how they would process manumission. But it was never easy, and it was part of the law. So finally, this is really pretty much the last of the videos that I want to do on slavery, but in your textbook, one of the things I like about your textbook is that it really is a very good textbook going into this whole chapter on slavery. Read through it. It's important for a lot of reasons. And part of history, American history, or any history, we have to address, I do think we need to learn history, not only to maybe not repeat it, because we kind of echo it, we're human beings. We have to emotionally become more mature, even when our toys, our technology becomes more mature and more advanced. We need to use our critical thinking skills and not look at things with a judgment and say, oh, this is always bad and this is always good, or beat ourselves up a million times over stuff. We must look at our history. We must look at slavery, understand the horrific aspect of slavery, that this is part of who we are now. It's part of who we were, but it's also part of who we are. We are taught hate. As children, we don't come out of the womb and think we don't hate. And brain research has shown a lot of this. There's really great brain research now about things like this. But we're taught this, and if we're taught this, then we can work towards creating a new, teaching something new, teaching something that's better. We can teach not to hate. We can also not, I don't think that it helps us to place a value judgment and say, oh, the United States is a horrible country because we had slavery. No, I wouldn't say the United States is a horrible country, but I would say that aspect of the United States was horrible. And it is still with us because look at what we have to deal with. We are still mired in a social construct where people who are black and brown have a lower socioeconomic ability to advance in this country and build wealth in this country. And all this comes from way back. We have a way to go. Now, I'm not trying to be political here. I'm stating as a historian, these are facts. These are real facts. And so when we look at our history, we have to be realistic. We have to use critical thinking skills. We have to evaluate who we are by who we were, and then move forward and embrace who we are, but in order to be who we want to be. This is very important, and it's not just in America, okay? Germany has had to do this with the Holocaust in World War II. Sweden or Switzerland has had to do this because they claimed themselves to be, neutral during World War II, but they allowed the Nazis to go in and, they let everybody do things that they knew weren't right. There's not a country on the face of this planet, or a history, a group of religious people. It doesn't matter. Human beings, we are good, we're bad. Sometimes we're wonderful, sometimes we're not. And because history is a story of us, it doesn't matter where you are. You have to understand your past and your country's past in order to understand how do we make decisions and how we move forward. So slavery, is, I think, a very important part of our history that we have to learn and we have to look at with open eyes. We have to be very upfront about it. And we have to use critical thinking skills as we do so. So I hope that these two little lectures helps you understand a little bit more about the earliest beginnings of slavery and then how slavery really does come to the Americas, North America in particular, into what becomes the United States. How it is systematized, put into law, and really the ethical aspects and the moral aspects of it, as you will read in your textbook, become very much the basis for leading us into the Civil War. The morals and ethics and economics, they clash, and how do we address it? And these are the things that this concept of slavery, the use of slavery, the systematic use of slavery, putting it into the legal system, binding it in the legal system, creating acts to maintain it, like the Fugitive Slave Act, addressing it in terms of manifest destiny, like we talked about last week, and determining whether states are going to be free states or slave states. It really is a feature of the conflicts between states' rights and federal rights, and morals and ethics and economics, and they all come together in this topic. And I think that as you read through your textbook, and as you think about social issues of today, Black Lives Matter, that you take into consideration and use critical thinking skills of what you're reading in this week's chapter, as well as these 2 mini lectures. Research, read, think about all this if you want to act and have an influence on how America looks going forward. Okay, I love you guys, mean it, and I hope that we talk soon. Okay, remember, if you need me, all you have to do is reach out and send me an email. Alrighty then, talk to you soon. Bye.